Dr. Martin, thank you so much for joining us. I have been so excited to have you on this podcast. Like I've told many people in my social circles, friends, family, the 3-day seminar that I was able to do with you completely changed my life. And I actually walked out of that weekend really with like my understanding of sleep, of performance, of hormones regulation, and everything flipped upside down. And so having you here is it's a treat. So thank you so much for being here.
I'm super happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I wanted to jump right into it, as I like to do. And one thing that has just been kind of fascinating me about sleep in general, and I guess this could be true for a couple other things, is that there's evolutionary developments that are happening with our species over time, right? Like if you think about the entire history of the human race and all the different changes that we've made over our lives and our lifestyles, the threats that we're exposed to, the way that we conduct our time when we are awake, and the places that we do and don't sleep. And while that's going along one train track, on the other one is how quickly our day-to-day lifestyles are changing with the introduction of technology. So we are just exposed to so much more, and we're using so much more to get our lives done, which changes how that 24 hours looks, at a much quicker rate than, our species is adapting. So with your understanding and your profession and the research that you've done, how do we accommodate for the fact that our lifestyles and our biological evolution are changing at different rates with regards to sleep?
This is a great place to start because we live in a world where in one generation, everything is different. I mean, if we think about our parents, our daily life is very different from our parents, right. And our kids' daily life is very different from ours. Technology is a big part of that, but it's not the only part of it. Travel has changed a lot too. Right. How much people travel, where they travel, how many people have that as part of their work lives, COVID notwithstanding. But human biological evolution is very slow. It takes many generations. So I also think we have to keep in mind that sleep may be an evolutionary adaptation. I used to get asked a lot, like, how can I get by with less? How can I not do it? Right. And the more we're learning about the benefits of good, healthy sleep, the more we're sort of understanding that it might actually be an advantageous adaptation. So, your comment initially about technology changes fast and our biology evolves slowly is how we get into a lot of trouble in modern society with our sleep. Because, maybe for the first time ever, you can do most things at any time during the 24-hour day. Right. You can shop anytime, you can socialize anytime, you can work anytime. We're probably the first generation that's ever really been able to do that. And that's not how we're wired biologically.
Yeah, because I think back we're not even going back that far in terms of generations, but I just think of my father and his line of work, right? As a general contractor, you get up in the morning, you have this drive to move, to be active, to get through the day. What do you do with that? You do physical labor, build houses. You could expand this to, I don't know, anyone working in the farming industry or any kind of labor industry where it's labor intensive, physical movement intensive. During the time that the sun is up or it's daytime, you're going through that. You're expending more and more energy throughout the day. And then as that closes, you get ready for this sleep state. And now, if I wasn't proactive about how I spend my day and my activity level, I could very easily wake up, be sitting right here the whole day and have an insanely productive day with zero physical output, neurological demands for sure. But by the end of the day, I could not feel any, ounce of tired from the physical output. So is that continuing to be a big driver in how people know when to go to sleep or how to handle that?
Well, So when we think about how sleep works in humans, one of the main drivers is our internal clock. The strongest clue for our internal clock is exposure to light. So when the sun is up, that's sending a signal to our brain that it's time to be awake. And when it's dark, that's sending a signal that it's time to be asleep. Physical movement is secondary to light in terms of, we call it entraining our circadian cycles or our internal clock. But it's not inconsequential. And, one of the things that we've really seen change during COVID is that a lot of people are working from home. Mm-hmm. I'll put myself in a group of people who spend a lot more time sitting down in front of a computer than I ever have. And raising your hand.
Yeah.
And definitely, I would imagine that through the course of the day, the amount of movement that I'm doing is less because the style of work that we do has changed. Now, when people are physically active, they tend to be more physically tired, and it does sort of scaffold a good night of sleep. Again, I think one of the challenges that all this technology engagement presents is it's a lot harder to be physically active during your workday unless you do have a physical job.
Right.
So I think that what we see is that people might be spending more time in bed now. They're spending less time driving to and from work, but they're not using that absence of commute time to increase their physical activity.
That makes sense.
They're using it for other sedentary behaviors. So this is kind of a strange conundrum that, I think if you'd asked people 5 years ago, if you didn't have to drive or commute to and from work every day, what would you do? I think a lot of them would have said, I would exercise, I would socialize with other people. And it turns out that's not what people have actually done.
COVID's quite the sample for a lot of this stuff to actually see. Yeah, I had listened to something you had said, which I found interesting about when you're trying to think of, how should I sleep? Kind of picture yourself on a vacation. If you were to fly somewhere, what would you naturally do? Are you someone that would, you're excited about being up late and seeing the city and being out and not really thinking about sleep? Or are you someone who's like, oh man, as soon as I get to Mexico, I'm in bed at 6, I'm going to wake up at 10. And it's kind of been the real life petri dish for that, of saying, hey, how are you? And in many things beyond sleep, I mean, many people realizing that they no longer want to be at the job that they were at because now they have perspective on the things that matter most in their life. But with sleep, you kind of saw who are you? Are you someone that's going to get up at 5 when you don't have to commute 2 hours to get to work by 7? Just to be up, to be alert, to, I don't know, maybe handle some tasks? Or are you someone who still gets up, snoozes once, and then gets up and puts your clothes on as you're eating breakfast and shows up for your Zoom meeting? What kind of insights have you seen with the whole COVID sphere of how people's behaviors are changing and maybe some of the theories that solidified and some that were debunked?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's very interesting. I would share 2 observations. One is people who, maybe always had a tendency to be night owls and struggled and suffered to get up and get to work in the morning, suddenly had the luxury of sleeping until 5 minutes before their meeting started, which you alluded to, which is great. And I had 2 teenagers during COVID, and it was wonderful for them to be going to school online and, getting up at 8:20, grabbing a bowl of cereal and being ready to start class at 8:30. That extra 45 minutes of sleep for a teenager makes a huge difference. I think for people that were more morning people, there were potentially some advantages too. They could kind of get up and start their day a little earlier. So I think people were able to kind of live in sync with their internal clock a little more. And you're right. I think some people kind of had insights that maybe some of the compromises they were making in terms of their own health, including their sleep habits and routines, maybe they weren't worth the trade-off for the job that they were doing. But really, I saw and heard a lot about people just kind of sleeping more in line with their own biological tendencies. The other thing that happened, though, is the not so rosy side, which is there was a lot of stress for a lot of people. For a lot of people, there was, a huge impact on their income. Sick family members or people who themselves got sick, especially early in the pandemic. A lot of stress about not understanding transmission. And, before there were vaccines available, I think a lot of people felt very kind of helpless about how to stay healthy.
Right.
And that stress definitely weighed on people when they got into bed at night. I think for a lot of folks, as things have kind of gotten back to normal and, we feel like there are more steps we can take to protect ourselves. A lot of people just went back to sleeping fine, but there's another subset who are probably still struggling to get back on track.
So there seems to be, there's a difference here between your individual desire to sleep, like your sleep preferences as a person. Like I like to get up at 5 a.m. I like to get stretching and prepared for bed at 8:30. And I do that every single night unless, there's some out of control thing that happens. That wasn't how it was in the past. And that wasn't a result of a study or something. That's just, I like that. It feels productive. I feel like I get enough rest. I happen to know, after doing our seminar, I'm still hitting those minimum markers, but that's a personal thing. There are clinical suggestions outside of that too. So how do these two worlds intersect? Because if, let's say you're someone who gets 6 hours of sleep, you think that you're a high performer, productive, I'll sleep when I'm dead, the whole shtick of people that align with that, right? And then you try to begin to sleep longer, and that in and of itself is stressful. How do you manage that trade-off?
Right. So maybe I'll start with, this idea that it's a worthwhile trade-off to sleep less and do more.
Which
because
it's not.
It's not, because what happens when we're sleepy is we're so inefficient.
Right.
And, I've worked with a lot of people over a long time. I mean, I've been in this space for more than 2 decades now. And what I find is that when people are well slept, they cope with a lot of emotional stress better. And I've never heard somebody come back to me and say, since I started sleeping more, my job has really suffered. I've never had anyone say that to me. I think the one exception might be people who are working in jobs with low wages where they really do need to just get a lot of hours in. That's a big challenge for folks in low income jobs. But for most people who are in middle or higher income brackets, who feel like they have to sacrifice sleep for productivity, what they find when they start sleeping more is that they get the same amount of work done in less time. And they're less worried about it. I mean, the emotion, the feelings behind it are more tolerable. But it's not just the sleep need, it's also when you sleep. And, there are a lot of people who, and I put myself in this category, I have a preference to, kind of get up early and go to bed early. Again, with teenagers in the house 24/7 during COVID, it was active in the household a lot later than I would have preferred, but I was able to kind of just shift a little later and have a schedule that's more consistent with them. Some people can't shift. They get stuck. So they either get stuck on a very late schedule or stuck on a very early schedule. And that kind of crosses that line into a clinical disorder where, they might need to actually talk to a sleep specialist and get some help with shifting their sleep timing so it's more appropriate. I like to think about this as like your dentist, okay? So there are certain things you do like brush your teeth twice a day and floss. And that's just like routine maintenance, just taking care of your teeth. Right. That's kind of like just the healthy habits part. having, getting at least 7 hours a night, having a pretty regular schedule, all the kind of basic, being physically active, not drinking caffeine close to bedtime, all of those kind of habits and routines. But if you have a cavity, no amount of brushing and flossing will get rid of the cavity. You need to go see a dentist and get the cavity taken care of.
Right.
You can do a lot to prevent the cavity in the first place, but every now and then you still might just get a cavity. That's kind of how I think about sleep disorders. For most people, if they just practice good habits, things will stay on track. And then there's a subset of people, they could be genetically at higher risk for cavities or for sleep disorders. And then, for some people, those bad habits just eventually catch up with them. And then they get cavities, or they develop sleep disorders. So there's really kind of two things there. And what I usually say is try all the things that seem simple and easy. Mm-hmm. And if you can't get yourself back on track, go get some help.
It's funny. The simplest and easiest thing that I ever heard in my life was from you directly. And I had asked a question about waking up in the middle of the night because prior to the seminar, I was convinced that my sleep habits were like atrocious. They were not good, more from a hygiene standpoint, an environmental standpoint. But going into that, I thought they were really bad. And I, in the past, had been one of those people that just identified with like, I'll sleep later, I'm just going to get up, do more, wake up, have more time in the day. And I asked you this question about waking up because I would wake up to go to the bathroom, once or twice every single night. And I'd played around with water consumption before bed and nothing was really affecting it. And I would get really stressed out. Like I would get up and I would get frustrated that I was up. Then I would get frustrated that I was not sleeping well. And you just go, you're like, that's fine. It's okay to wake up. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? I was expecting, some big, long clinical answer. And you're like, it's okay to wake up. It's not natural to sleep perfectly 100% of the time for your entire life. You're gonna wake up. And it was that moment, in a way, you freed me from worrying about it anymore. And then that next day, I went to bed, I woke up to go to the bathroom. I was like, that's fine. Nothing bad's happening. And I went right back to sleep. And it was from that day forward that I realized that there was, and I had gotten sleeping prescriptions in the past when I was in college. And it was such a simple thing, but I just didn't know the right questions to ask myself about how to get to that outcome.
Well, that's the weirdest thing about sleep is that you can't make it happen. And in fact, trying to sleep in and of itself messes you up.
Yeah.
And it's such a hard thing to wrap your head around sometimes because you can't actually make yourself fall asleep. You just have to be there and let it happen to you. And when I work with people who have sleep disorders, this is sometimes a big challenge because you go see your doctor, you have a big conversation about it. There's a bunch of recommendations. There might be, a CPAP machine or a prescription or a referral. And the whole point is to not try and just let it happen.
Right.
And it is a hard place to get to. And, I think there is a little bit of just accepting that it's kind of out of your control. And yeah, it's funny. I remember that now that, it's not, you started our conversation by talking about evolutionary biology. It totally makes sense that throughout the night we have periods of deep sleep and periods of light sleep because there are moments throughout the night where it could be an advantage to be a little more aware and easier to awaken just in case there's something going on, right? If the forest next to your cave is on fire, it would be great if you wake up. So, we're probably made that way for a reason because if we have these oscillations during the night where we go into stages where we're sleeping very deeply and we're very hard to awaken, then we kind of transition into a lighter stage of sleep where we're easy to awaken. If there's something going on around us, we'll be able to respond to it. Now, getting up and going to the bathroom at night is one of those things that is very annoying and very common. And we don't really think of it as a clinical condition unless it's more than twice a night. The one caveat I would say is if it's something that you never did and all of a sudden it's happening all the time, there are some kind of organic causes, but it's not unusual and it's not a disorder to wake up at night and go right back to sleep.
Yeah, it is interesting to think about on the evolutionary side, that sleep is really a feature, not a bug of our species. It has all these fantastic properties, which I'd love to cover in a little bit here. But it also is fluid. You can wake up out of it, which is a great thing to be able to do. If, like you said, the cave's on fire, or if an intruder comes into your house, you don't want to sleep through that. If your baby's crying, you don't want to be sleeping through that. So there's some functions to this that I think on the front side, when you don't consider the context, could be infuriating, right? Here I am, you get all this information about how valuable sleep is. You really want to make a change, and you know that there's growth hormone production, and it's hindering you from, being able to recall things at work and have mental acuity. And so you really, really want to do it, and then you try and you can't.
Yeah.
It's a process. It's okay to go through that and remember that some of these things are very, very important to be able to do.
Right. And there's really two sides to this coin. One is I'm going to try to get away with as little sleep as I possibly can because I don't think it's important. And then the other side is sleep is so important that I will sacrifice the most important things in my life to protect it. And there is a healthy medium there where, it's like I like to use, you probably heard me say some of these things. It's okay to have cake on your birthday, but you can't eat cake 3 times a day. It's not, you'll have health problems if you do that. And sleep is kind of like that too. If you just generally take good care of your sleep, and then every once in a while you go to a concert or you get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to catch a flight for a vacation, or, you're staying in a hotel and the alarm goes off in the middle of the night. If that's a once in a while thing, we're pretty resilient to that. And
that's an important thing to remember too, for anyone who's listening who uses some sort of tracker or a wearable. You can become obsessive compulsive about the data. It's really easy to do that and become fascinated with everything that you're doing and monitoring. But when you fly to Europe and you get up at 1 a.m. to catch your flight, and you're functioning because you have to, because you got to get there, you got to do the thing, and you got to get on the flight, and you can't forget anything. So you're in a heightened state of alertness. And then your readout says that, you're at a
readiness
2% recovery.
2. Yeah, whatever that means.
Of course you are. It's because you should be, because that's the modern day equivalent of waking up in the middle of the night and realizing there's not enough food for the people in the cave.
That's right.
And now you have to function on an instant and go out and provide or do whatever it is that you have to do, and not have that derail you for 5 months.
That's exactly right. And again, what we know is that the more consecutive nights of messed up sleep that you have, the effect is cumulative. So I always try to encourage people, take care of your sleep in general, and then mindfully decide to make exceptions for things that matter to you, that are important.
Right, calculated. So maybe we can unpack a little bit of what is happening while we are sleeping. What are the benefits? Why should we really be concerned with this thing in the first place? It's something that happens anyway. Why do I need to really be worried about that? I'm doing my job fine. I'm training fine. What is happening when we go to bed?
Well, let me start first with what it means to be fine. This is something I hear a lot.
Love it.
I'm fine.
Yes.
And the truth is that if you have no comparison, if you've been, somebody who's had either a sleep disorder or, has a lifestyle where they don't get enough sleep, or where sleep is irregular, and you've been doing that for a long time, humans are very bad at estimating how impaired they are when they're sleep deprived. And there are these great experiments of like people doing driving simulations, or driving a course with cones after they've been up all night. And then they'll ask them like, how do you think that you did? And people say, oh, I did really well. I mean, I might've hit a cone or two. And they look back and it's like the cones are all over the place. So, I mean, we're not good at assessing that, is the first part. And then, what's actually happening, there's a lot going on. And this is perhaps one of the big myths, is that when you go to sleep, everything stops. We now know
everything
that,
starts.
Yeah, one of the new findings I say from maybe the last decade is that, metabolic waste is cleared from our brains while we sleep. So that was something we really didn't understand. I mean, there's some people who theorize that could be linked to neurodegenerative conditions like Alzheimer's disease. It's theoretically possible. I mean, people are still researching that. We know that growth hormone is secreted while we sleep. Almost all of the growth hormone that we make in a 24-hour period is secreted during sleep. So for kids, it's really important, but also for athletes that are recovering. Sleep is really important. We consolidate information into long-term memory while we sleep. So if, I mentioned earlier, I have a couple teenagers. When they have big tests, I'm like, I'm not the mom who says, oh, you have to study. I'm the mom who says, well, you better get a good night of sleep. So, I think the learning and memory and different stages of sleep, some of it is like emotional learning. So learning situations to avoid for your future safety. And some of it is muscle memory. And some of it is just, information, retaining information. So all of the things that we experience during the day that we want to encode and store, all of that happens while we're sleeping at night. The other thing that's been really interesting to see is the effects of poor sleep on metabolism. Things like insulin regulation, cortisol, leptin and ghrelin. All of those are closely linked to our biological clock and our sleep habits. And this becomes particularly relevant in people who are trying to lose weight or people who struggle to maintain a healthy weight. There's now a few studies in people who are trying to lose weight that if they're chronically sleep deprived, no amount of dieting and exercise will get them there. It really seems to be that there's a huge advantage to getting more sleep.
This is, sorry to interrupt. No. This is so relevant because it seems in media and advertising that the thing that's holding you back is exercise.
Right.
So you get this big push in the 80s and into the 90s and into the thousands. Mm-hmm. Gyms grow in size and placement, and fitness becomes this very frontal thing that like the ripped person, the in-shape person, it's because they're working out, because they're putting in the effort and they got grit and they work hard, yada, yada. Then on the other side of that, it became apparent that actually it's really the food that you're eating is having a much bigger payout on your weight management, how your body looks, how you feel, your energy levels. But there's this third piece to the puzzle that is extremely important, and that's rest, which historically can almost conflict with the others because people would think that, okay, if I'm going to get my fitness in, but I work a 9 to 7, I'm going to get my fitness in first thing in the morning, so I'm going to cut sleep to do it. Mm-hmm. Then I'm going to eat healthy throughout the day, or whatever it may be, and it ends up being this vicious cycle when, in reality, sleep is the foundation of which you build nutrition and exercise on top of. Because like you said, if sleep is managing your cortisol production, your metabolic function, your leptin and ghrelin drive, that's controlling everything about what you do and how you consume food.
So this is another, potential evolutionary adaptation. And I have a dog and a cat, and they do not stay up late for fun. When they're tired, they sleep, right?
Yep.
And humans are like unique in this, that we intentionally keep ourselves awake when we're tired. And if, again, go back 1,000 years or so, why would that happen? Food shortage and danger. And in both of those circumstances, the best thing for our biology to do would be to hold on to every extra calorie we can get our hands on. So, what happens—
That's really interesting.
When people are sleep deprived, and this is also true for people who have some sleep disorders, they consume more calories. Even if you account for the additional expenditure from being awake and moving more, when people are sleep deprived and they're, sort of allowed to eat whatever they want, they consume higher calorie foods, they consume larger quantities of food, and really tend to reach for the sweet, salty options.
And you're saying that's a passive function,
Correct.
Right? So if you took two people that were the same and one was more sleep deprived, one was less, without realizing it or without actively going, I'm going to eat a ton of food today, that other person who's sleep deprived will naturally just consume more total calories in
Correct.
a day than the other.
And it's more than what is made up for the increased metabolic caloric need. So, if you're walking around, you're burning more calories. So there's a group in Chicago who has a name for this. They call it hedonic intake, like the intake that you consume that's above and beyond what you need. Like, it's just to make you feel better.
Well, that's the dog and the cat thing is really interesting because we have a dog and a cat too. And if you watch them, you'll put food out and they won't eat it. And then maybe, I notice this the most with our dog. Oh, no, I take him to the dog park, come back, and he'll destroy his food. But sometimes if we have a low activity day, if, we're stuck in meetings and work all day and we just don't get as much output, the food will sit there for a long time. And when he's bored or tired, he'll sleep. And then when he gets up, he'll eat.
Yeah.
And it seems to be married to output and sleep volume.
Right. Well, and for humans, it's one of those issues too, which I think is a social issue, that we're taught to ignore our kind of internal drives. And I think that applies to food and to sleep. That, there's food cues all over all the time. And there's things to keep us awake all around us all the time. Instead of like pausing and really thinking about what our body needs, which our pets are very good at. If there's food there and I think this is not true for all animals. I definitely had a dog a long time ago who there was food, he would just eat it all the time. I think that we have, there's kind of an unhealthy link between some of these things too. As far as I know, most healthy food options are not available at 2 a.m. But you most definitely can go get a bean and cheese burrito and a large soda, or Jack in the Box, or pizza, or it's almost like it's capitalizing on that desire for sweet, salty, high calorie foods that we all feel when we're up in the middle of the night.
And that's a production of lack of sleep. So sleep deprivation in any quantity, maybe we can define what that is.
Sure.
Will result in a natural drive neurologically or hormonally to consume salt and sugar.
Yeah.
Right.
And just
which
more
are
calories.
Most readily found.
Right.
Yeah. And more total food, which is found in all the foods that we know to be detrimental to our health.
Right. And, I've never met anyone, at 2:00 in the morning who says, hey, let's go get a salad.
Good luck finding one.
Right.
Anyway.
Exactly.
But so what does someone do so let's say someone recognizes that maybe they're in this group, that they have not prioritized sleep in the past, or maybe struggling with weight management or weight gain too, because we know from everything you said, it's also going to affect your ability to put on muscle or increase performance. And they want to start to do this. Where is a good place to begin?
a good place to begin is with some self-reflection and maybe some tracking. And then, I'm a big advocate for small changes that you can sustain over time. A common observation that I see people make is by Friday, they're just exhausted. They are completely spent, and but they also want to do something social. So they end up going out on Friday evenings, and then Saturday they recover really from a tough week and maybe a late night the night before. And then Sunday's a little better, and then they start the whole thing over again. So sometimes just thinking about small opportunities, like, can I just sleep in 15 minutes longer during the week? Right. Is there, can I limit the things that I'm doing late in the evenings on the weekday so I'm not so exhausted by Friday? Do I want to give up going out every single Friday night with my friends and maybe do it once in a while as opposed to every week? So sometimes just picking one or two things to work on, kind of doing an environmental scan and saying like, okay, this is the place where I sleep. Are there things here that are impacting the quality of sleep that I get once I'm here?
So this was a massive change following hearing everything that you had to say, that I went home and kind of looked at like the area that I sleep in. Mm-hmm. And I feel like for a lot of clients that I've talked to, this varies a lot from the living room to the bedroom to the guest room to the, you can, and it's not to say that one is worse than the other, because for some people that might be a preference and they might sleep very well in that place. Maybe they sleep in a separate room so that they don't bother each other in the middle of the night or what have you. But when I looked at where I was sleeping, I had computer in the bed, phone right by the bed. Both of those things, they provide entertainment and they provide information. And when you consume information, you make inferences and you think about stuff. And so you always use the example of a news article, which is great, right? You're going to read a headline and it will do something to you. Either you'll not care, you'll care a lot. Maybe it's emotional. Maybe something horrible's happened and it just got published and it's 9 p.m. and you consume that information. And now you're thinking. As soon as you begin to think and process and make inferences and wonder, and you're distracting from that state of relaxation, that state of rest. And the place in which you do that is really conducive to one or the other.
And
I think about like a Buddhist temple, right? You go to a Buddhist temple, what do you think? What's the first thing? You go, whoa, right? Like you sit back and it's relaxing. It is an environment that is designed for self-realization. They're not playing the Super Bowl in the corner of the Buddhist temple. That's for a reason, because that's not what that place is for.
Yeah, and this is something where I think work from home has seriously messed up our sleep spaces. I mean, I live in California. I don't have a huge house. And last year there were 3 of us at home all day, every day. And, I don't have 6 bedrooms. Right. So, my kids trying to creatively come up with some space for them to be in school. They're teenagers. So the first conversation was, we don't attend school from bed. We'll just start with that. Right. And then to kind of have at least within their bedrooms, a dedicated desk computer that wasn't facing their bed so that they weren't, kind of in that mindset. I think a lot of people, again, during COVID have restructured their home so that their bedroom doubles as a workspace during the day. Right. And even that, some visual barriers, having a clear disconnect between when that's a workspace and when that's a sleep space, all of that is really important. And
that would fall under sleep environment, right?
Exactly.
That's kind of the space in which sleep happens in your home. And then sleep hygiene is another contributor to this kind of Venn diagram of how to sleep well.
Right. And that, sleep hygiene's not my favorite word. It's like, what is your sleep dirty? But, but I think, the kind of umbrella term about the habits and routines and things that we do. I kind of put it into bins. I mean, one is sort of this sleep environment. And like I said, I mean, stand at the door of the room where you sleep and then look around and say, does that make me feel relaxed? Is that conducive to sleep? Of course, one of the biggest offenders is the television.
Right.
That's like, just an absolute no for me is no televisions in the sleep space.
The TV lobbyists would be angry at you because we have no TV in our room. We have our cell phones we plug into the bathroom in a separate area because it's far enough to hear the alarm, but it's not close enough to wonder. It's
I always say,
it's crazy how much changing that.
Put your head on your pillow. Put your head on your pillow. Stick your arms out. You should not be able to touch your phone. I can't always get people to get it completely out of their room, but the thing to avoid with the technology at night is that sort of knee-jerk reaction to turn on the screen and shine the light in your face.
Right.
The other aspect of sleep hygiene is really thinking about how your daily habits around food, exercise, we talked a little bit about fluid consumption. Are all of those things sort of supporting a good night of sleep? And the big offenders, I think, are caffeine and alcohol. And not to say that you can't have caffeine and alcohol, but most people need to cut out the caffeine 10 hours before they go to bed. So if you go to bed at 10 o'clock, that would be, around noontime. If you go to bed at, midnight, that would be around 2. And alcohol is a tricky one because it makes people feel relaxed. It even makes them feel sleepy. But as alcohol is metabolized, it really messes up our sleep. What I usually suggest when it comes to caffeine and alcohol is a little bit of an experiment. Like, try going a week with no caffeine and no alcohol and see how your sleep is. And then, again, come back to that mindful decision. I remember I had a patient years ago who she had a lot of insomnia problems, and she was about 78 years old. And, she's telling me that on Thursday night, she'd go out to dinner with her friends and she'd have a couple glasses of wine and her sleep was a mess. So she decided not to drink. And she said, I slept better. But my friends made fun of me. And, then we didn't finish a whole bottle of wine and they gave me a hard time because I was wasting their money. And so I think I'm just going to have a glass of wine and not sleep well on Thursday nights.
It's so crazy.
Okay.
Go ahead.
No, it's just, this is the kind of like mindful decision making. But, and she said, at some point, if it really bothers me, I know that if I totally stop drinking alcohol, I sleep better. But I really kind of appreciated her perspective. Because we don't live to sleep, we sleep to live. And again, I think some of these little experiments, I love to have coffee after dinner and I know it will keep me awake. So for me, it's something I do once or twice a year. But I know what's going to happen.
It's interesting when you make the calculations about when anyone's adopting a new habit, there's like the 5-star version of the habit, which is you're some freak that has no friends and all you do is sleep really, really well and get all these amazing benefits. And then there's somewhere in the middle where like you live your life and you try to get the best out of it. And part of that, like you said, is experimenting. You have to know. So the caffeine thing is really interesting because I'm coffee obsessed. I love coffee. I love the act of making it. I got all this different stuff to make it differently. I love going out to coffee when we travel. Coffee is as important as food. It brings you into fun pockets of the city that you wouldn't find, and you meet different people. Like some of our best memories traveling in different countries are these really cool little cafes. That's coffee driven. But following your seminar, you were talking about the half-life of caffeine is how many hours?
The half-life is about 5 hours. So
5 hours. Yeah. So I heard that and I was like, whoa, okay, well, there's one of my problems, right? Is I'm going through the day, I'm training a lot of clients, and then I'm about 4 or 5, I'm having like a Celsius or a coffee or an iced coffee, not thinking about it, maybe not even needing it, but I know that I was having it. And I was like, that's at least a place to start. I don't have to take coffee away from myself because that's not the end goal, right? I love it. She loves the wine. You like having coffee after dinner. But to choose when and where you do that so that you get what you want, that you get your cake and eat it too kind of thing.
Yeah.
And what you find is it's totally possible.
Mm-hmm.
But it was really affecting the quality of my sleep. Alcohol, crazy how much that impacts quality amongst clients. And even, I mean, my fiance, Lauren, she can have one drink, absolute tops. That's it. Or sleep's destroyed. And growing up, I just always thought that alcohol led to good sleep because you're so lethargic when you've drank. What's happening on a hormonal level or on like a biological level when we consume alcohol? Why is that so detrimental to quality sleep?
What happens is that there's an enzyme called alcohol dehydrogenase that's used to metabolize alcohol. And that particular enzyme is very activating. So what will happen is people will have a couple of drinks in the evening, and then the alcohol dehydrogenase activity peaks a few hours later. So you might come home after work at 5, have a cocktail, at 7:30 after dinner, 8 o'clock, you're tired, but then you kind of get that second wind. Mm-hmm. Or people who drink later in the evening, like after dinner, what might happen to them is they get into bed and they fall asleep, but a few hours later they're awake. There is a dose effect. So, another thing is a glass of wine is different from a bottle of wine in terms of the, the effect of that alcohol dehydrogenase enzyme. The other thing to know is that the effect that alcohol has on our sleep changes as people age. And I don't think about aging as something that starts when you're 65.
Right.
Aging starts as soon as you stop growing. So, for girls, late teens, for boys or men, early 20s. After that, your body starts aging. And so that might mean you could do something you're 25 that you can't do when you're 35, something that didn't bother you when you were 35, but when you're 45, it does. And the effect of alcohol and caffeine on sleep seem to be things that a lot of people could just get away with when they were younger. We're more flexible and resilient. And our sleep does change a bit as we age. It's not really true that people need a whole lot less, but we get less of that kind of deep sleep where it's hard to wake us up. Our sleep tends to be a little lighter, and therefore we're awakened more easily by things like alcohol metabolism.
So I have a question about this. You mentioned how our sleep changes as we get older, like as we age. You're more lighter. You spend less time in that deep sleep, that unwakeable sleep. So I'm going to the best of my abilities here, just cover the stages. Mm-hmm. And I have a question about the stages. So if you fall asleep and this happens to me a lot where I'll fall asleep and then I wake up almost immediately. This happens pretty much every night. Mm-hmm. I've learned to let it go thanks to you. But that's like our light sleep stage. Then when we fall asleep, we get into these 2 non-REM cycles. So non-REM 2 and non-REM 3, which are the first of the deeper stages, but not the deepest. So you get growth hormone production, recovery of muscle tissue, memory recall. So all of these are happening in the first 2 to 3 hours of us being asleep.
Well, what happens is we have a period of REM sleep about every hour and a half. Okay. And in the first 2 90-minute cycles, that's when we tend to get that deep sleep, which we call non-REM stage 3. Yeah. We used to separate stage 3 and stage 4. We kind of lump them together now. So that happens in the first couple of cycles, as you said, about the first 3 hours. And then in the later half of the night, the amount of time that we spend in REM sleep gets longer and longer. And we tend to not have that deep non-REM stage 3 in the second half of the night. So I like to think about it like the first half of the night is when we get that deep non-REM sleep. The second half of the night is when we get more REM. But that 90-minute cycle is what's repeating itself, the cycle where we start a new phase of REM sleep.
So if you're, I mean, I guess to play a little bit of devil's advocate here, let's say you're someone who's concerned with growth hormone secretion. And you're like, I just want to get stronger and I know I need growth hormone, and you're getting ready to go to the doctor to get like TRT injections or something. And you're like, well, if I'm thinking about my sleep economy, I'm only going to sleep the first 3 hours because that's when I'm going to get it anyway. And then maybe I forego the dreaming and the emotional learning side of things that happen later, but that's not really what I'm after. What's that person missing?
Well, first of all, your body will outsmart you. Because what will happen if you start to miss out on all that REM is the next night, your brain's going to try to make up for it. So
Gotcha.
Whatever you're missing, your brain will force you to get, including sleep itself, right? I mean, this is why people fall asleep and have accidents, because at some point your brain just makes you sleep. So if you're missing out on a lot of REM, what'll happen is you'll start having more REM in those early hours. But you do miss out on the things that you mentioned with that structure. I'm always kind of, I don't know if intrigued or surprised or what the right word is. But, what is the thing that people do after, a big athletic competition? They go out and they celebrate and stay up late.
Right, they party.
They miss all of that. And in fact, I guess it would be better to go, sleep for a few hours and then, go out and celebrate at 3 a.m. or something. I don't know. But, there is a missed opportunity for recovery there. But to your point, if you miss that second half of the night and you try to say like, well, I'll give up on that part today, you're going to pay it back at some point. There's no free lunch, as they say.
Right. So you're always on a rolling schedule with that then. So whatever you miss out, you're going to be forced, whether you want to or not, to take it at some later time.
Yeah.
So is that then what leads to napping, right? Is somewhat of a realization of this is that your body is telling you, hey, despite your best efforts, this happened to me oddly well timed, right, for this episode. I haven't taken a nap in, I honestly think like a year. My schedule has become so ironclad, and sleep being a big part of that I don't ever feel that drive to sleep. And 2 days ago, I came back I think I stayed up late doing some preparation for a podcast, and it was like well past my bedtime, right? So it's about like 10 o'clock at night. And the next day I was like, man, I had to start training clients at 5:30, and I was just shot. And that day, in the middle of the day, I was eating lunch. Dog jumped up on the sofa with me, and my fiance took a picture of both of us just completely out. Like dog passed out on my chest, and I'm sitting here. And I was like, wow, I took a nap. And then I was thinking about that. I'm like, what pushed me to do that? And it was this cumulative lack of sleep that I had started to feel, but maybe I wasn't really paying attention to. And sure enough, just like you said, my body stepped in and said, hey, we're going to do this right now. Why does that happen? And is it bad?
Well, let me start by saying there are cultures in the world where everybody takes a nap every day.
Spain.
And they're fine. So
right.
It's part of their routine. And, when my daughter was a middle school student, she went to Spain and spent the summer with some friends of ours. And she thought this was the best thing ever because they stay up late at night. And then they get up a little bit later. They go to the beach, then they have lunch, and they come back and they take a nap in the afternoon, and then they, go out for the evening. So she thought this was great fun. Of course, if you work, it means you have to have kind of two parts to your workday, but we just don't generally have our society set up to function that way. But there's actually nothing wrong with it. There is a natural dip in the alerting signal from our internal clock in the afternoon. So it can be a great time to take a nap if that's part of, how you get enough sleep and you can structure your day around it. But what happens is getting sleepy is like being hungry. So to use kind of a metaphor, if you had not eaten breakfast that day, right? So you'd be pretty hungry by the afternoon hours.
Right.
And so what probably happened to you is over the past few days, you were a little sleep restricted. And once you had that like perfect storm of a cute, cuddly little dog and sitting on the comfortable couch in the afternoon and the dip in the circadian alerting signal, all that sleepiness just kind of comes to the surface. So I think it's something that, I always say napping is not a bad thing if it's part of a plan. When napping could be a little bit problematic is when people who really are trying hard, like they're struggling with insomnia at night, and then they may use a nap to try to make up for something that happened the night before. And then they're sort of setting themselves up to not be hungry enough for a full night of sleep the next night. So I think naps are usually driven by a combination of being sleepy, having a little bit of extra sleep drive, and then that dip in your circadian alerting signal that happens in the afternoon.
So I have this is entirely selfish, this question, but sometimes when I nap, and this is a very strange experience, it reminds me kind of that initial, 10 or 15 minutes of falling asleep where I fall asleep. And like I said, this happens probably 3 or 4 nights a week. And I immediately wake up, kind of jolt. I'm up and then I go back to bed. When I take a nap, when I wake up, if it's anywhere between 20 minutes and 40 minutes, I wake up and I get a rush. It almost feels like an adrenaline dump of memories from childhood, adolescence, my teenage years. It's really, really strange. And they'll be the same way that a very vivid dream feels so real when you're in it, almost where you can act as if you're in reality. They're so powerful. Like I feel them. Like I can almost see like I'm there in that memory doing the thing. And it's always, I mean, I should ask a psychiatrist this, right? It's always this same block of time in my life between like 15 years old and 20. And the memories will range from athletic memories to relationship memories to, things between me and my parents, or the first time that I took a driver's test. I mean, there's no limit as to what can happen, but it's a very unique experience.
I mean,
what is that?
Well, let me say two things. One is not all dreaming happens during REM. Most dreaming happens during REM. So we do have kind of mentation sometimes when we're, during different stages of sleep. But it's possible that, maybe your brain is starting to enter REM sleep. A lot of times we do have awakenings around those transitions. So you get just kind of a snippet of something that if you're going to be sleeping all night, it could have turned into a dream. Or it's just one of these unexplained phenomenon. I don't know. It's sort of what I'm thinking as you're telling me these stories is it's again, this myth that our brain is just sitting there doing nothing when we're sleeping. This sensation that you have as you're just dozing off of waking up suddenly, that's also really common too. Again, it's not something that's
and it doesn't
pathological.
It doesn't affect quality, right? Like I can do that. In the beginning, I would do that, and I'd be like, I never sleep well. I can never stay asleep. And then I realized I actually do. I do sleep well. I sleep fine. I just sleep fine after that happens. And now I've come to, unfortunately, expect it. Like I'll go to bed, and I'm kind of counting down the seconds in my head till I get that wake. But then, and tracked too. I've looked at it against tracking the actual sleep quality to whatever metric, efficiency there is. And found that, like, okay, despite that occurrence, it actually doesn't have an impact on how well I can stay asleep or the quality of that sleep.
One of the funny things is that if you have a friend who says, I'm a great sleeper, my head hits the pillow, 8 hours straight, I never wake up. And you put them in a sleep lab and you record their brain activity, they do wake up. for some
They
reason,
just don't remember.
some people just don't remember that. And on the flip side, there are people who remember in excruciating detail every moment that they're awake at night. We don't really know why that's the case. But there are some individual differences, again, in how much people remember of what happens during the night.
So maybe I'm just broken, but I also would love to hear your insights
variant.
on I think you would call them hypnagogic hallucinations.
Yeah.
So this is another thing that happens. It's like the evil twin of this whole nap thing. Is I'll go to bed and I wake up and I kid you not, I've tried to explain this to people and they think I'm insane. Full on visual, like things are in my room. I am not over exaggerating. They're in my room and it is fluid shapes and symbols and people and faces. And it started happening when I was 16. Because I distinctly remember, and I ended up writing about it. I thought it was so strange. I actually thought that I was going to have some like mental condition because of this. And then I asked you about it, and you were like, oh, no, it's actually very common that people experience this visual onslaught when they wake up out of one of the stages, right?
It's out of REM, yeah. So, as I mentioned, dreaming is something that happens during REM. And what happens to some people is like their brain doesn't wake up all the way. What you were talking about, these hypnagogic hallucinations are visual images that like most of your brain is awake, but you still have these bizarre visual images. Another thing that can happen that's also related when people wake up out of REM is they'll feel like they're fully alert, but they're paralyzed.
Yes.
And this is called
also guilty
sleep paralysis. And what happens is that, again, most of your brain is awake, but during REM, we do have paralysis of our skeletal muscles, and that just takes a little longer. About 1 in 4 people have experienced that at some point. So it's not a majority of people, but it's not like a teeny tiny minority either.
And so is that a function, is that a physiological function that happens to disable activity in the rest of the body so that our brain can, like, why would you get paralysis yet still maintain activity?
So you don't play tennis in the middle of the night while you're asleep. I mean, there's a sleep disorder called REM behavior disorder where people, it's neurological, where they are not paralyzed during REM sleep, and people hurt themselves. I mean, they act out their dreams. I mean, there's some famous cases of people like hurting their bed partner while they were actually asleep, and then it turns out that they had REM behavior disorder. It's a condition that tends to occur in older people, more older men than older women. I don't know why there's a sex difference. And a certain proportion of people with REM behavior disorder go on to subsequently develop Parkinson's disease. So it may be an early marker, when it starts late in life, it may be an early marker for Parkinson's. It's not 100%. But it is associated with a higher risk.
How unfair that, with science, we get to better understand all this type of stuff. And if you went back to, I don't know, like the Middle Ages and you're someone who has hypnagogic hallucinations, 1, you're going to be labeled insane. 2, you're going to think you're possessed, that it's demons come, I think back to all these, or even like mythology, like back to Greek mythology and the stories that come out of those time periods and what people were talking about and the meaning that they placed behind it. And then you wonder, you're like, maybe they just weren't sleeping.
Right. Well,
like what came out of that?
I mean, there's a couple of possibilities. One is that you'll be viewed as gifted.
Right.
Right. That you'll have some special powers that other people don't. There are some cultures where dreams are ascribed like tremendous meaning. And dreams are really interesting because we do incorporate what's going on in our lives. I mean, a simple example, you don't dream in a language you don't know, right?
And that's a fascinating thing actually about learning a language neurologically. When I was a Spanish major in college, and then I went and studied in Spain, and there's a distinct point, and if you talk to anyone who's learned a language, there is a point at which you stop dreaming in your own language. And it's very strange because the cognitions and the conjugations and everything that you're doing in real time when you're learning something to try to speak properly and make sure you put the right ending on the right word and the right pretense, you end up just doing it. And that's kind of the first step in fluency, is that you're starting to get this passive understanding where you can talk at a certain level in your dreams. But it's really weird when that happens.
I also, early in the COVID pandemic, I did a whole bunch of media interviews because apparently there was this huge uptick in people experiencing nightmares and really disturbing dreams. One of my favorite stories was somebody who told me they had a recurring dream of being at dinner at the White House with President Trump in pajamas and being horribly embarrassed that they were at the White House with the president and they forgot to get dressed. And like all the anxiety about like how to figure out how to be presentable, in this bizarre situation. I
would trade their nightmares for my nightmares any day. Any day.
Of course. I mean, but that, this like stress in the dream, which probably had a lot to do with what was going on in the world at the time.
For sure.
And that's what happens to us, is that the emotions and some of the tidbits of what's going on in our daily lives and in the world show up in our dreams, but dreams are not bounded by reality either. So that can make them pretty terrifying because there's no physics in dreams, right?
No rules. Yeah.
Yeah. And, a lot of people who were experiencing stress started having chronic disturbing dreams that were messing with their sleep. As you and I were talking about, if you wake up in the middle of the night and you're worried about something, you can't wind down and go back to sleep. And for a lot of folks, what they were actually worrying about were these disturbing and distressing dreams that they were having, not just showing up at the White House in pajamas, but, sometimes much more significant worries and concerns.
What are your thoughts personally, like maybe research hat off, on just what dreams are and where they're happening?
It's funny, when I was first a graduate student, I went to this retreat. It's like neurobiology retreat. And we had a debate. And one of the teams was, dreams are like these carefully orchestrated, systems of neurons that are developing synapses and all this. And the other is just like random. I remember very little about the justification for both sides of the debate. And then I decided to become a psychologist, so I don't do neuroscience. But I think that dreams are probably part of our emotional learning. I think that the content of a dream is probably less important than the gestalt or the emotional valence of a dream. I don't know whether they in and of themselves serve a purpose. And I think that there is this line where they, like chronic disturbing dreams, can become a sleep disorder that we actually need to address. And now I'm not totally sure I answered your question.
No. So with that, so you're saying pre-existing trauma, for example, may lead to unwanted dreams or recurring unwanted dreams that create stress. And then if that creates stress, you're reflecting a sleep pattern. And then if you're getting 3 days of restless sleep a week and you have that for 3 months, and now technically you have insomnia.
Right. And there's another layer to this, which is, I work a fair amount with people who have post-traumatic stress disorder. And a lot of times their dreams are a replay of the traumatic events that happened to them. But again, they're not bounded by reality. So sometimes they're actually even worse than what they experienced in real life. And they change over time. And then for other people, it's a different scenario, but the same set of emotions, like feeling like you can't protect yourself, like, that, something is out of your control and you're trying to control it. So, interestingly, and then let me say that there's another layer, which is sometimes having nightmares about traumatic things that happen to you. It's almost like reliving it because it is a very real experience.
Totally.
There's a treatment for this, which is really interesting, where you actually re-script your dream. And
how?
You
writing it down
legitimately write it as a script. And you practice it during the day. And over time, the things that you dream about change. I didn't develop this treatment, and to be really blunt about it, I did not think it would work at all. But it kind of harkens back to what we do with little kids who have dreams about monsters under their beds, right? We make up stories about the monsters being friends, and then they come out and they play games, and then they visit and they do. I mean, it's kind of the same concept. I've worked with a number of people now where, maybe there's a traumatic event like an accident, and we start before the accident happened and we rewrite a new story with a different ending. And then they just keep visualizing that new story over and over again. And it's really interesting because, again, our brain incorporates into our dreams the things that we're thinking about during the day.
Right.
And, I think one of the things that was happening early in the COVID pandemic is everything we were engaged with was bad news. And so what were we dreaming about? I mean, we were dreaming about, global pandemics, cities shut down, people dying on ventilators. I mean, this was the imagery that was in our face all the time. No wonder this was happening.
Maybe, and again, maybe this is more a question about neurology and less about sleep, but how is it that you can create in your dreams faces and places and things with high resolution, high definition that you've never seen or don't exist?
I have no idea.
Because this is like, that happens to me too.
This is like Nobel Prize stuff, right? And the other thing is, remember, you don't remember seeing these faces or places consciously. That doesn't mean that they never passed across your visual field, right? I mean, if you walk down the street, I'm sure you see,
very good point.
Hundreds of people every day. You don't remember every single one. So it's hard to know also whether some of the things that we dream about are not so easily accessible when we're awake and conscious, even though they're back there somewhere.
If I had like a genie lamp, I think one of the questions, if I had 3 questions, one would 100% be about dreams. It's fascinating to me. I mean, you said it so many times today, and I think it's so noteworthy, is that sleep is not when things stop. It really isn't. And look no further than your own dreams. Mm-hmm. It's when everything happens. Your brain, to think that your brain can produce a world that isn't even in your reality, in your visual field, completely on its own, out of nowhere, when you're not even, whatever you define you as, is not even there to participate.
Right.
All while you're regulating your hormones, you're secreting different hormones, you're learning when you're asleep. That fact alone just blows my mind, because we're, conditioned through schooling and everything to think of learning as such an active thing, that you're in front of the teacher, you're writing the notes, you're studying the note cards. That's what learning is, when really that's not the coding that's going on the brain level. And that can only happen in this really special environment that it is sleeping. Mm-hmm. It's fascinating to me.
I think so too.
That's why I spent a career doing it.
It is really interesting to me. And I, the other thing that I think people underestimate is the impact of our sleep on how we feel. So not like our ability to regulate our emotions, to cope with distress. We're learning more and more about mental health and, even things like, depression, anxiety, things even as extreme as thoughts about suicide. When people have trouble sleeping, and they have thoughts about suicide, when we treat their sleep problems, those thoughts actually get less common and less severe.
Wow.
And of course, this is like a big picture thing, but I don't hear a lot of people who say that they get along better with their spouse or their children when they're sleepy. Most people say,
not at all.
I'm exhausted. I'm not present with my family. My toddlers irritate me. There were some, kind of cute experiments years ago where they took like 2-year-olds and had them skip their nap and then had them try to do some things that were frustrating, and they just freaked out, right? We're not that different. And I think if we reflect on some of our interpersonal interactions that maybe we're not so proud of, you can probably attribute, if you think back, a lot of times you were probably pretty tired when those happened.
Tired, and just, I think generally in day-to-day life, like your clarity in the moment and your ability to do whatever's in front of you or be there for it. When you're sleep deprived, your cognitive abilities are diminished.
Correct.
So if you have a task that you have to perform for work, or maybe a task in a relationship, right? Someone say, "Hey, Jennifer, can you pull the laundry out of the thing?" Like, yeah, sure. Your ability to remember to do that is going to be affected by your sleep quality. Mm-hmm. And so then if there's repeated instances like that where one person is being forgetful about something or failing to do something or failing to participate in a discussion or a board meeting at work when you should have been listening, now it's a problem. Yeah. Now it's not just like the sleep, it's the ripple effect of that and how it can affect relationships, business, life, well-being. And if those things are all affected, then how's your brain, how are you going to be feeling?
And, it's interesting because if you just said, go get the laundry and fold it, that's fine. But if the phone rings, what we're bad at when we're sleep deprived is the extra, right?
Interesting. Yes.
So, you might have a big deadline at work and you feel like everything's going okay. And then the phone rings and your kid is throwing up at preschool, right? Like now you're toast. That's when, that's when, when people who are sleep deprived who say, "Oh, I'm doing fine." The truth is they probably are doing fine as long as everything goes according to plan.
Which it never does.
It never, I mean, hey, my experience in life is that things seldom go according to plan, right? Which is sometimes a great opportunity, right, to discover something new. But if you're tired and your brain is not, sort of running on all cylinders, then we have a hard time processing things in that spirit.
One thing that I've come to appreciate is and again, I think it all stemmed from the weekend seminar that we did, is the process aspect to this. And maybe I'm a little bit more primed to deal with this because of just a life of training people and telling them, hey, this is going to take time. We have to learn how to eat well. We have to learn how to exercise and show up on time and everything. And it's a process. It really took me, it was a solid year and a half of pretty forthright effort in trying to solve this complex problem of my sleep. Yeah. And there were a lot of downs in that. There were a lot of getting in bed and feeling restless and getting out, or getting in bed and saying this is stupid and getting my computer, or whatever it was, whatever the behaviors that pre-existed good sleep were, they were hard to get rid of, and it was tough to get through that. And it's a process. You have to really be willing to put the foot forward, but no, it's going to slip a lot of the time.
It's a great point.
And that's why I loved your direction of really making these small, make the adjustments really little. Don't, it's not, okay, tonight I'm going to sleep 10 hours. It's unrealistic. Because then you get this, and this happens in training and movement mechanics pretty profoundly that as you accomplish more, you believe that you can do more things. So it's just the self-efficacy in action. Once you start to see that you do feel more ready for sleep when you're not on your phone, you're like, oh, well, maybe I should try this. And then you do, oh, that's kind of work too. And then you have some days that don't. When you're working with clients or you're bringing people in for a sleep study, how do you talk them through that aspect of it?
I really like to start this conversation with why you want to sleep better in the first place. Like, what is it about your life, like the important things, where you feel like if I slept better, then this really important thing would also be better? Usually people tell me things like their families, their job, their health.
Right.
And that's really the motivation for making these changes. Then when you're doing something...
What if they say they just want to use sleep aids or melatonin or CBD oil or something?
To be honest, knock yourself out.
Right.
I mean, that's not what the evidence would suggest is the best thing to do. But I think again, sort of starting with what are the reasons that you want to sleep better, because these are not easy changes to make sometimes. They're going to involve giving up a habit or a routine that you have and replacing it with something else. And it has to be worth it. And like I said, my general approach is let's come up with something that works for you, 80 to 90% of the time, and make mindful exceptions. So I start with why do you want to actually sleep better? And then, I try to get a handle on what a person's schedule and routines are like. And then we pick a couple of small things to start with. Usually it's around having a more consistent wake up time, because once you start getting up at a more consistent time, you start feeling tired at a more consistent time. And then part two is, and then when you start feeling sleepy, go to bed.
So, crazy.
As opposed, I know it seems so simple until you actually try to do it. And right. I'm also a fan of successive approximations. So if you get up at 6 on weekdays and you sleep until 9 on the weekends, well, what if you got up at 7:30 on the weekends and maybe went to bed a little earlier? And try that, The other thing is, especially when it gets to this issue of weekday, weekend differences, everybody always assumes it means they have to get up super early on the weekends. And it doesn't, because maybe what you should do is just sleep in later during the week and move some of the things that you're doing early in the day into the evening hours, if that feels better for you. We have a tendency to accept certain things about our biology, like how tall we are, right? If you're not a tall person, you don't put things that you use every day on the top shelf in your kitchen, right? You put them in places where you can reach them, and we just accommodate. We are kind with ourselves about that. But if you're somebody who's not a morning person, don't have a work schedule where you have to get up super early and fight against that aspect of your biology. Obviously,
so one thing with this that I'd love to get your perspective on is this does seem like a privileged solution in some cases, because for that example, I think it's great. And I definitely identify with being a morning person. Mm-hmm. So basically any job's on the table for me, right? I love getting up early. I like starting the day like that. But finding out that it's not bad to like to sleep in should probably put a lot of people at ease. It's okay to want to sleep in. Just make sure you get the right amount of time. But then you think about there's a socioeconomic issue here that you can't in many cases.
This is very true. And, one of the things that I'll say is, I mentioned this earlier, it's tough in people who, have low wage jobs in Los Angeles where I live. It's very expensive to live here. And I would say that you do the best you can with what you have. So if, you have a full-time job and a part-time job and a commute in between them, you're going to have to be really thoughtful about the quality of sleep that you get at night and do the things that are within your control, which might be as simple as a pair of earplugs from CVS, right? I mean, it could be literally a 99-cent solution. And then I think we also need to advocate for policies that make it better for people in general. I mean, one of the big ones in California is we have high schools can't start before 8:30. That benefits all kids from all socioeconomic levels.
Right. And parents.
Right. And honestly, as a working parent, later school start is great because there's less childcare after school.
Right.
You know, I think one of the arguments was, well, late school start is hard for parents. And I'm thinking the opposite. I'm thinking, well, if my kids get out of school at 3:30, that means I only have an hour and a half of childcare until I get off of work at the end of the day. So, you know, I think there does need to be kind of a larger societal conversation. The other thing is that low income communities tend to have more noise and light pollution at night. So, you know, if you live near, you know, industrial areas where there's, you know, trucks in and out all the time, higher density housing means more cars on the streets, things like that. These are society level problems. And I think there's an opportunity for some public health advocacy, just like we do around, you know, trying to have parks in lower income neighborhoods and access to healthy, fresh foods. We should be having the same conversations about things in communities that support good sleep health.
Yeah, I guess it's a moment to, you know, just be grateful for the fact that if you're in a place where you can listen to this and think about how you're going to change it, like you're already in a pretty good place. And it's disheartening when you think about that kind of stuff, that someone could be in a position where they really do want to do the best thing for themselves and they're actually physically limited by socioeconomic issues. I remember, you know, even in living in Spain, you said your daughter lived in Spain, right? Because that is part of the culture, it trumps socioeconomic issues. Right. So everyone goes home. And I remember this. It was great because in the middle of school, you just stop. Or in the middle of work, you know, we did an internship while we were there for my program. And in the middle of the day, every single day, it was so weird to adjust to at the beginning. You take a break. Everyone takes a break. Right. And that is ironic because at the time, Spain was in the worst economic downturn they had ever experienced in their life. But it's to say that it is interesting when you do impose something on a countrywide level, the benefits that it can have on everyone. All people, everyone in the family can benefit from something like that. Right. I personally don't think that with our mentality and our views, America would ever be in a position where everyone's going home for a break. No. But at least COVID did provide a little bit of a snapshot into how this type of thing could work and what we would actually do with that time if we had it. Right. And I think that this may be part of why it is hard to find employees right now for a lot of companies, especially in low-paying jobs, because I think people's calculus has changed a little bit, and for sure, and that may be a really healthy insight for a lot of people. And I also feel like we need to start this conversation a lot earlier. And again, we need to start thinking about school for children and, set the stage that sleep is important for kids. Because, there are some data in the nutrition space where teaching kids about healthy eating changes the eating habits of the whole family. Well, what if we did that with kids? What if they came home from school and said, "Hey, Mom, it's 10:30. You really should turn off the TV and go to bed because you need to get up for work tomorrow." I mean, those things actually make a difference. When I was an athlete, like all through high school in skiing, and it's interesting you propose that because at that time, granted, I was extremely dedicated to my sport, disproportionately to my peers. I would have gobbled that up so fast. I would have made, whatever sacrifices I was told that I needed to make, I was there to make them. And sleep was not part of the equation. We didn't even really, at that time, we didn't even really talk about food. And you were under the guise that, I'm a 18-year-old. Doesn't matter. I can, eat whatever I want. I can go ski every single day. And for the most part, you got away with it. But had sleep been a part of that conversation and positioned from the athletic performance aspect, so valuable, so valuable. And I'm really excited to see how these types of conversations and people with your kind of pedigree get in to talk to athletes and, NCAA foundations and different sports teams, because it is the supplement.
I mean, it's also the best form of recovery.
Right.
I mean, it's injury prevention, it's skill building, it's recovery, it's all of those things. I also was an athlete.
Which is ironic with the growth of this recovery industry right now with the Theraguns and the Hypervolts and everything. Like, people are gobbling this stuff up, and you can't out-train a bad diet. You can't out-recover poor sleep. No massage gun is going to do what an additional 2 hours of sleep will do for you, ever.
Well said.
Maybe not ever. I mean, I don't live in the future, but it's just such an interesting, I get fielded questions all the time of like, hey, should I get these for my legs? Should I buy this for my massage? And I literally, every time, I want to start the discussion with, can we just chat like real quick about your
the fact that
habits?
You were shopping online for that at 3 a.m.?
Right. I got to recover. I got to get a leg up. It's like, if you the soreness, the tightness, the inability to build strength, you can't master new movement mechanics because your brain's not firing to develop them. Like, I guess that's a great segue into how I wanted to close this was, what is the future of sleep?
I think that sleep, I'll call it sleep health, okay, is starting to become one of those things that we talk about when we think about overall wellness. I think that we have more and more, I don't know if you want to say the public or consumers or patients, or people have a greater and greater awareness about the fact that a good night's sleep is an important part of staying healthy. And, the hopeful side of me thinks that what is in the future is, maybe some health policies that do support good sleep, perhaps some regulations in some certain industries that make it harder for employers to force people to work at night when they don't really need to. Right. There will always be jobs where people have to, but maybe not all of them. And again, I think we're starting to see this transition where schools and states and school districts are really starting to think about how much better kids do when they're rested. So the future is hopeful to me that this will start becoming something that we routinely talk about. And coupled with that when people are struggling, when they have sleep disorders, that they have healthcare providers out there who can, provide them with the best treatments. But right. I see this as kind of a ground up sort of movement at this point.
It seems like there's an accumulation of data.
Correct.
And more people being interested, like the conference you're going to, that with more known information about this, we can begin to continue to make these inferences and then enact, hopefully change on a town level, a community level, a country level.
Yeah, the other thing I see changing in the science space is, I feel like what we're learning about genetics of sleep and some sleep disorders may really advance therapeutics. When I was a student, we had no idea that there were genes that controlled the internal circadian clock in humans. Now there's, I think, a couple dozen different genes that have been identified. Like, that's literally all in the last 20 years. And as we understand those things, then we can develop treatments and therapies and targeted interventions for people. So, that's the other thing that I think we'll see big leaps in terms of treatments for sleep disorders in the next, decade or so.
Well, I cannot wait to talk about that again in the future. And I'm very, very excited to do an episode following your time at this conference. Like I said before, it was well timed in that I think you just came out of the previous one a couple years ago.
Uh-huh.
So I'm sure that there will be awesome insights to share, and hopefully more conversations like this will just hit more ears and get people thinking about it. Because like I said, that one weekend completely changed my life. So, you never know how effective something like that can be.
It was really a pleasure to be here today and talk about my favorite subject.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Martin.
Uh-huh.